The rain had turned to sleet an hour before dark, and by the time it found the crossroads above Iveston, it had turned again, to something that was not quite snow. It came down thin and hard, like grit thrown from a closed fist. The road smelled of wet wool and cold stone, and underneath both, the thin, sweetish char of a chimney somewhere down the hill, the last house that had not yet gone to bed. Iris Hale was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. She was not pretty in any way the village had a name for. She was not plain either, not exactly. She was simply a woman people looked past on their way to someone worth looking at, and she had long since stopped minding it, or told herself she had. She was 27. Though the cold had a way of adding years to a face that did not sleep enough. She had one gift the village paid for in coin, when it paid at all, and 100 more it took for granted. She read letters. Half of Iveston could not read a word past their own names signed with a mark, and so on market days they brought her their sons' letters from the sea, and their sisters' letters from London, and she read them aloud in the back room of the chandler's shop for a penny, or for nothing, if the letter was bad news and the woman holding it was already crying. She mended lace too, fine work, small stitches, the kind great houses paid for, and small houses could not afford to need. Her hands were red at the knuckle from the cold water she washed the mending in. They were steady hands. She had trained them to be steady the way she had trained herself not to weep where it showed. She had a daughter. Rose was 6, quick, thin as a reed, with a laugh too big for her size, and a way of asking questions that made grown men look at their boots. Iris raised her alone in 2 rooms above a cooper's yard, on bread and barley and whatever the mending brought in, and she had told herself, the way a woman tells herself a thing until it is nearly true, that she did not need more than that. The frost was going to take somebody before Candlemas, if no one did something. She had said it to the chandler's wife 3 days running, and 3 days running the chandler's wife had said, "Well, and what would you have anyone do?" and gone back to her scales. That evening Iris was coming home the long way, by the crossroads, because the mending had run late, and the short way through the churchyard frightened her less in daylight than in a sleet that hid the ditches. The wind came sideways off the moor, and found every seam in her cloak. She had her shawl wound twice around her throat, and still felt it in her teeth. She heard the boy before she saw him. It was not crying. It was smaller than crying, a sound like a door working loose in the wind, on and off, on and off. She stopped. She told herself it was a lamb, or a gate, or nothing at all, and she stood there a moment deciding whether to be the kind of woman who walked on. She was not. She found him in the ditch on the milestone side of the crossroads, a boy of perhaps 8, folded in on himself with his knees to his chest, no coat, no shoes, his feet gone the colour of tallow. He had stopped making the sound by the time she reached him. That frightened her more than the sound had. She did not think. She moved. She had her cloak off before she had decided to take it off, and she had it around him, and she had her own boots off next, the good ones, the only ones, and onto his feet, though they were built for a grown woman, and hung loose as boats on him. She rubbed his hands between hers until her own hands burned worse than his had. "Can you hear me?" she said. He made a sound that might have been a yes. "Then you are going to walk with me, not far. You are going to walk because I cannot carry you the whole way and keep you warm both." She got him up. She got him walking, one arm under her stockinged feet, finding the ruts of the road by memory more than sight. She did not sing to him. She did not tell him it would be well. She only kept saying the same 3 words, over and over, like a rope thrown again and again, until a hand finally closed on it. Not far now, not far now. She did not know that she was watched. A man stood under the black shape of an elm 40 paces back from the crossroads, where the road bent and the ditch ran deep enough to hide a horse standing in it. He had been riding since noon in a plain greatcoat, with the collar up and a hat pulled low. A traveller with no crest on his harness, and no servant riding behind him, which was itself strange for a man whose horse was worth more than the whole of Iveston put together. He had stopped to let the animal breathe. He had not meant to see anything at all. He watched a woman with no cloak and no boots half carry a stranger's son a mile in a sleet storm, and he watched her do it without once looking round to see who marked it. He did not call out. He did not follow closer than the dark allowed. He only watched, and something in his chest that had gone still a long time ago, the way a well goes still under ice, moved once, faintly, like water remembering it was water. She did not know then that the man under the elm was the Duke of Harrow, reported dead these 6 years, returned to England 11 days past, and to no one's knowledge but his own. She did not know that he had ridden this road that evening for no better reason than to be alone with what he had become. She did not know that he would follow the shape of her disappearing into the sleet the way a man follows the one true thing he has seen in a year of false ones, and that he would not, from that night. Stop, she only knew that her feet were bleeding by the time she reached the cooper's yard, and that Rose was awake and frightened, and that the strange boy would not say his name. She got him warm. She got him fed on the little there was. She sat up with him till past midnight, and when at last he slept, she sat by the window a while longer with her ruined feet in a basin of water gone cold, and looked out at a road she could no longer see, and thought, without any particular reason for thinking it, that somewhere out there the frost had not taken anybody after all. Not that night. She was wrong about the anybody. It had very nearly taken 2. The boy's name, when at last he gave it, was Tom. He had no people that he would name, and a bruise along one arm that Iris did not ask about because she already knew the answer and did not want it said aloud in front of Rose. She kept him 3 days on broth and her own bed while she slept in the chair, and on the 4th day the parish beadle came to take him to the workhouse, because that was what happened to boys like Tom. And there was no arguing with a beadle any more than there was arguing with weather. She argued anyway. "He is not fit to walk 4 miles, she said. "He is not required to walk. There is a cart. He is not fit for the workhouse at all. He is fit for a bed and broth for another week, and then we will see." The beadle looked at her the way men in authority look at women with no husband and 2 rooms above a cooper's yard, which is to say, as if her opinion were a kind of weather too, something to be waited out. "You are not his mother," he said. "You have no claim." "No," she said. "I have no claim. I only found him." She did not win. She rarely won arguments with men who carried the parish's authority in their coat pockets like a second set of buttons. But she walked beside the cart the whole 4 miles, in borrowed boots 2 sizes too large, and she made the beadle promise, in front of witnesses, that the boy would be fed before he was set to any work, and she did not cry once the whole way, though her throat ached with the want of it. She refused the shilling the beadle offered her at the gate for her trouble. "I did not do it for a shilling," she said. "Then why did you do it?" She had to think about that. "Because no one else had," she said at last, and someone was going to have to. She would have said the same thing to anyone. She would have done it for anyone. That was the whole of it, and she never once thought to make more of it than that. What she did not know was that a note had already gone ahead of her, in a hand she did not recognise, to the master of the workhouse, instructing that the boy called Tom be kept from heavy labour, be given a second blanket, and be examined by a physician at the first sign of fever, all costs to be met by a gentleman who wished his name withheld. The workhouse master had raised an eyebrow at the note and pocketed the coin that came with it, and asked no further questions, because gentlemen who wished their names withheld generally paid well for the privilege. Iris never saw the note. She went home to Rose and the mending, and thought no more of the matter, beyond a fortnight of unease that ended, at last, when word came round that the boy was mending well, and had been set to light work in the kitchen garden, out of the wet, out of the cold. She was glad of it in the plain way a person is glad to hear a worry has come right, and she went back to her lace and her letters, and did not know she had been seen at all. 3 days later a girl came to the cooper's yard with a message that the housekeeper at Harrow Court required a woman skilled in fine mending, for work on the household linens and the late Duchess's laces, which wanted careful hands and had found none in the county to suit. The pay offered was more than Iris had seen in a 12-month. She did not ask why she, of all the women in Iveston, had been sent for. She only put on her one good dress, the boots that were hers again now, mended and resoled by a cobbler she could not truly afford, and walked the 2 miles to the court gates before her courage could fail her. She did not know then that the housekeeper who greeted her at the servants' door, a broad, dry, unhurried woman named Mrs. Pruitt, had been given her name by a gentleman she called only Sir, and that the gentleman had described the woman he wanted in words so exact, the shape of her hands, the colour of her cloak, the way she carried herself, that Mrs. Pruitt had known at once he had seen this woman somewhere he had no business being, and had asked no questions, because that was how she had kept her place at Harrow Court for 30 years. Mrs. Pruitt looked Iris over now, once, the way a woman looks over a horse she has already decided to buy. "You'll do," she said. "Mind the east linen closet is not to be disturbed. Mind your hands are clean before you touch the old lace, it does not forgive oil, and mind you speak plain to me, and to no one else in this house, until you have been here a month, and know who is worth speaking to." "Yes, ma'am. There is a gentleman about the place from time to time," Mrs. Pruitt said, and something in her voice changed so slightly that Iris nearly missed it, "who oversees matters for his Grace in his absence. He is called Mr. Ash. If you meet him you will find him civil enough, though not talkative. Do not let his manner trouble you. He is not unkind. He has simply forgotten how to be otherwise, of late." Iris said she would remember that, and did not think much more of it, and went to work on lace so old and so fine it seemed made of frost rather than thread, and did not know that the gentleman called Mr. Ashy was, in every particular that the law and the church and 6 generations of Ashes before him could make him, the Duke of Harrow himself, home from a grave that had never truly held him, and standing, at that very hour, on the far side of a closed door, listening to the sound of her voice answering his housekeeper, for the first time in 6 years, without letting himself be seen. She met him properly a week later, in the long gallery, where she had gone to fetch a frame for the lace and lost her way among the portraits. He was standing before one of them, with his hands behind his back, very still, the way a man stands before a grave he visits out of duty rather than grief, or grief so old it has learned to wear duty's clothes. He did not look like a steward. She noticed that much and set it aside, because it was not her place to wonder what a man of business ought to look like. He was tall, and not handsome in any way the ballad singers would trouble to rhyme. His nose had been broken once and set indifferently. His eyes were a grey so pale they looked, in that northern light, almost the colour of the frost she had waded through a fortnight before. He was perhaps 32, though grief had put lines in him that 30 years alone had no right to. "You are lost," he said. "Not a question. I am looking for the frame room, sir, 3rd door. Not the 2nd. The 2nd is a dressing room no one has opened in some years." A pause. "You are the woman with the lace." "I am, sir, Mrs. Pruitt speaks well of your hands." His eyes went, briefly, to them. Red at the knuckles still, from years of cold water. He did not remark on it, and something in his not remarking on it told her he had noticed everything there was to notice. "They are only hands, sir. They are not only anything," he said, and then seemed to hear himself say it, and looked, for a moment, almost startled by his own words, the way a man is startled to find a door unlocked that he had thought he had barred himself. He looked away first. "I will not keep you from your work," he said. She went to find the frame room, and did not look back, and did not see him watch her go the whole length of the gallery, past a dozen dead ashes in oil and gilt, none of whom, in his private judgment, had ever done a kindness worth 1/10 of what he had watched her do for a stranger's son in a sleet storm, expecting nothing, and not knowing anyone of consequence had seen. The winter wore into a slow, grudging spring, and Iris found her days folding into a shape she had not planned, and did not entirely trust. 3 mornings a week she walked to Harrow Court and sat in the long light of the linen room with lace older than the county records spread across her lap. And 3 evenings a week she came home to Rose with a little more in her pocket than she had gone out with, and told herself this was simply work, the same as any other, only better paid. It was not entirely true, and she knew it was not entirely true, though she would not have said so aloud to anyone, least of all to Mrs. Pruitt, whose dry eye missed very little. Ashy was often about the house in those months, in the way of a man who managed things rather than a man who owned them, and Iris came to know his habits the way one comes to know weather. He rose early. He rode out alone, always alone, in all conditions, and came back close-mouthed about where he had been. He ate little, and Mrs. Pruitt fretted over it in the kitchen, in a voice meant to carry, though never quite far enough to reach him. He spoke to Iris perhaps twice a week, always briefly, always about some particular of the work, and yet she found that these brief exchanges had begun to sit in her mind longer than they had any right to. "You read as well as you sew," he said to her once, having found her puzzling over a torn direction on a length of old damask that named a stitch in French. "A little, sir. Enough to get by." "Where did you learn it?" "My mother taught me, before she died. She had been a governess once, before she married beneath what people thought she ought to have. She said a woman who could read owed it to herself to keep the skill up, whatever became of her afterward. She sounds," he said, "as if she was right about a great many things." "She was right about most things and wrong about the man she married," Iris said, and then flushed, hearing the plainness of it too late to call it back. He did not look offended. He looked, if anything, faintly amused, an expression that sat so unfamiliar on his face that it seemed to surprise even him. "Most of us are wrong about one man or one woman," he said. "It is what we do afterward that tells the rest of the story." She did not know what to make of that, and did not ask, and he did not explain. and the moment passed the way most of their moments passed, quietly, unfinished, and yet somehow whole in themselves. It was in that season that small things began arriving at the cooper's yard, with no name attached. A basket of coal, left at the foot of the stair, the week the frost came back hard and unseasonable in March. A pair of stout boots in Rose's size exactly, though Iris had told no one at the court what size her daughter's feet had grown to. A physician, sent for without being asked, the single night Rose ran a fever so high that Iris sat up till dawn with cold cloths and prayers she had not said since her own mother died, and a knock came at first light, and a plain, unhurried man with a bag said he had been sent, and would take no payment, and would not say by whom. "Who sent you?" Iris asked him, standing in the doorway with her hair unbound and her hands shaking, for once, in a way she could not steady. "A gentleman," the physician said. "He asked me not to say who." "Why would he ask that?" "I could not tell you, madame. In my experience, the men who do the most good are generally the ones least eager to be thanked for it." She stood in the doorway a long while after he had gone in to see Rose, turning that over, and could make nothing certain of it, though a name kept rising unbidden to the edge of her thought, and she kept pushing it back down, because it made no sense for a duke's steward, a man of business with no fortune of his own to speak of, to be paying physicians for a mender's sick child, and because she had trained herself long since not to hope for things that made no sense. She did not know then that the coal, the boots, the physician, and a dozen smaller mercies besides, all traced back through a chain of quiet instructions to the same closed hand, and that the hand belonged to a man who sat each night in a cold study at Harrow Court, with a letter he had begun and abandoned 100 times, a letter meant to tell her everything, and could not yet find the courage or the right shape of words to send. The spring assembly at Harrow Court was the first the estate had held in 6 years, since before the old Duke died and his heir was lost and mourned and never, until 11 days before Iris found a boy in a ditch, found again. Word of it ran through Iveston like water finding a crack in a wall. Mrs. Pruitt put half the household to airing linens and polishing silver that had not seen candlelight since the funeral, and told Iris, almost as an afterthought, that her particular skill would be wanted that week for the mending of gowns among the guests, and that she was to bring Rose along, rather than leave her home alone, since the work would run past dark. Rose thought this a very great adventure. She had never seen a room so large it swallowed the sound of a fiddle, nor so many candles burning at once that the light itself seemed to hum. She was given a corner near the servants' door to sit quiet in, with strict instruction not to wander, which she kept for the better part of an hour, and then did not keep at all. Lady Editha Voss arrived among the first guests, and the room seemed to arrange itself around her the way a room arranges itself around cold. She was the late Duke's sister, aunt to the man everyone now called His Grace, and she had run Harrow Court's affairs of consequence, marriages and mournings both, for the better part of 2 decades, and she meant to go on running them. She had brought with her, on this occasion, a young woman of excellent family and indifferent warmth, named Lady Constance Pride, whom she introduced to every corner of the room, as though reading a deed of sale. Iris kept to the sewing-room most of the evening, called out twice to mend a torn hem in the passage, rather than in full view, and it was on the second such errand, kneeling in a doorway with a needle between her teeth, that Lady Editha found her. "You are the mending woman," Lady Editha said. It was not a greeting. "Yes, my lady. I am told you found some beggar's brat on the road last winter and made a great show of your charity over it." Iris kept her eyes on the hem. "I found a child freezing in a ditch, my lady. I do not know that I made a show of anything." "No," Lady Editha said. "I dare say you would not know it, if you had. Women of your sort rarely do. You mistake want of manners for goodness of heart, and the world, more fool it, is generally taken in." She looked Iris over once, the red knuckles, the turned him of her own gown, the plainness of her altogether. It must be a comfort to have so little, that any small thing you do looks large by comparison. Iris did not answer at once. She finished the stitch she was on. She bit the thread. She stood and smoothed her skirt, and only then looked Lady Editha in the eye. "I would have done it for anyone, my lady," she said. "I did not do it to look large. I did it because the child was cold and I was not. How very simple you must be, to think that answers anything." "It answers the only question I was asked," Iris said, and dropped a small, correct curtsy, and went back to her needle, and did not let her hands shake until she was 3 rooms away, and certain no one of consequence could see them. She did not know that someone of consequence had, in fact, seen every word of it from the far end of the passage, where he had come looking for his aunt to settle some question of precedence, and had stayed, unseen, to hear the whole exchange through to its end. His jaw set so hard, it ached him for an hour after. It was in the ballroom, not a quarter-hour later, that Rose slipped her corner at last. She had grown tired of watching skirts go by at knee-height, and had gone in search of the music itself, and found, at the edge of the great room, a tall, grave man standing entirely alone against the wall, while every other person in the room gave him a wide, careful berth, the way people give a wide berth to a thing they do not understand and are a little afraid of. No one asked him to dance. No one, Rose noticed, hardly looked at him at all, except sideways and quickly away again. She thought this was very sad. She had not yet learned that some kinds of loneliness are chosen, or that some men stand apart on purpose. She only saw a person nobody would talk to, in a room full of people talking, and she walked straight up to him in her 2 large borrowed shoes, and looked up into a face far above her own. "You are all by yourself," she said. He looked down at her for a long moment, as though she had spoken to him in a language he had once known well and half forgotten. "I am," he said. "May I dance with you?" The words dropped into the small space around them like a stone into still water, and for one held breath nobody near enough to hear them moved at all. A man did not dance with a child at such gatherings. It was not done. It would be remarked on, and not kindly, and he knew it before she did. He knelt instead, which surprised the room rather more than dancing would have, and brought his eyes level with hers. "I would like nothing better," he said, "but I think perhaps we ought to walk it instead of dance it, since you and I are neither one dressed for a proper turn about the floor. Will that serve?" Rose considered this with the gravity of a magistrate. "It will serve," she said. He took her hand, small and cold, in his, and walked her the length of the room, and back once, slow, unhurried, while half the assembly pretended not to watch, and the other half did not trouble to pretend. He did not smile, not exactly, but something in his face loosened that had not loosened in a long while, and Mrs. Pruitt, watching from the doorway with a tray she had forgotten she was carrying, had to set it down before she dropped it. Iris came round the corner in time to see the end of it, her daughter's hand in the hand of a tall stranger she took at first glance for some lord she did not know, and her heart stopped so completely, she thought, for one instant, that it might not start again. She did not know then that the man kneeling to speak with her daughter, as though she were the only person of consequence in the room, was the same Mr. Ashe whose ledgers she had never once seen him carry, the same steward who spoke to her twice a week of stitches and damask, and that within the week she would learn precisely who he was, and what it would cost her to have loved him a little, unknowing, before she knew. Rose came running back to her a moment later, breathless, delighted, entirely unaware that she had done anything at all remarkable. He was sad, she told her mother, by way of explanation, so I asked him to dance. Everyone should be asked, at least once. Don't you think, Mamma? Yes, Iris said, very quietly, watching the tall man rise and turn away toward the far doors without once looking back at her. I think everyone should. She did not sleep that night, though she could not have said, if pressed, exactly what kept her waking. It was not fear, not entirely. It was the shape of a question she did not yet have words for, turning over and over like a stone in a shoe. The days after the assembly went strange and thin, the way days go when a person is waiting for something without knowing what it is they wait for. Iris went back to the linen room out of habit more than anything, and found Mr. Ashe absent 3 days running, called away, Mrs. Pruitt said, on business that could not wait. On the 4th day Lady Editha came to the linen room herself, which she had never once done before, and stood in the doorway with her gloves still on, as though the room itself might soil her. I understand, Lady Editha said, that you have made yourself something of a fixture here. I mend the lace, my lady, nothing more. You mend the lace, and you are seen walking the gallery with the steward, and your child is seen taking his hand in front of 40 guests of quality, and you say nothing more. Lady Editha's mouth made a small, precise line. I have kept this house from scandal for 20 years, and I do not intend to let a mending woman and her forward brat undo the work in a season. You will finish the pieces you have begun. You will not be wanted after. Iris set down her needle very carefully. Have I done poor work, my lady? You have done work above your station, and drawn eyes above your station, which is worse. I did not ask for the eyes. No, Lady Editha said. That, I confess, is the one thing I believe of you. You never do ask. You only manage, somehow, to be seen asking nothing, and to be rewarded for it regardless, which I have found, in women of your sort, to be its own kind of design. She turned to go, then paused at the door. Finish the lace, Mrs. Hale, and take your daughter home, and keep her there. Iris finished the lace. 3 days later, without waiting to be told again, she took her daughter home, and did not go back. It was Mrs. Pruitt who came to find her. A week after that, on an evening when the last of the spring light lay long and gold across the Cooper's yard, and Rose was asleep, and Iris sat alone with a basin of cold water and hands that would not stop wanting to shake. You have not been to the court, Mrs. Pruitt said, from the doorway, not waiting to be asked in. I have not been wanted at the court. That is her ladyship's opinion. It is not the only one that signifies. Mrs. Pruitt came in, uninvited, and sat herself down at the table as though she had done it 100 times before, which, in a manner of speaking, she nearly had. I have known you 3 months, Mrs. Hale, and I have said little of what I know, because it was not mine to say. I think it is past time someone said it. Said what? That the coal at your foot of your stair, and the boots that fit your girl before you had told a soul what size her feet had grown, and the physician who came in the black of night and would not take a shilling, none of that came from me, and none of it came from chance. Mrs. Pruitt folded her hands on the table. It came from Mr. Ash, every piece of it. He has been paying for your girl's health and your own ease for the better part of half a year, and he asked every single time not to be named for it. Iris did not move. Why would a steward do such a thing? Because he is not a steward, Mrs. Pruitt said, and I think, Mrs. Hale, that you have half suspected it a good while, and have not let yourself finish the thought. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside a dog barked twice and fell silent. He is His Grace, Mrs. Pruitt said. He has been His Grace since his father died, and word came that he himself was lost at sea, near 6 years past. He was not lost. He was taken, in the way of war, and held where no letter could reach home, and by the time he was free to write, the family had long since had him buried in every book that mattered, and it suited certain persons in this house that he stay buried a little longer than the truth required. Certain persons, Iris said, very low. I have said what I mean to say, Mrs. Pruitt said. The rest is his to tell, if he has the courage for it, which I begin to think he does not, left to himself. He has written you a dozen letters, Mrs. Hale, by my own reckoning, and burned every one before it left his desk. Iris sat a long while after Mrs. Pruitt had gone, with her hands flat on the table to keep them from what they wanted to do, and thought back over every quiet exchange in the gallery, every unremarked comment on her hands, every strange sudden softening in a face that did not know how to soften, and felt the whole shape of the last half-year rearrange itself into something she had not let herself see, because she had not dared to want it to be true. She thought of her own husband, 6 years gone, a young officer with grey eyes and a broken nose from a boyhood fall, married to her in secret in a country church, because his family would never have countenanced a governess's poor daughter for a son who might, in time, inherit a dukedom none of them then expected him to live long enough to hold. She thought of the letter that had come, black-bordered, telling her he was lost at sea, and of the family that had turned her from the door within the month, denying the marriage outright, burning, she now understood, whatever record might have proven it, and sending her into the world with a child not yet born, and no name but her own to give it. She had believed him dead for 6 years. She had built a whole life on the belief, brick by brick, the way a person builds a wall over a well they can no longer bear to look into. And he was not dead. He had been in the same house as her for half a year, and had watched her daughter, his own daughter, ask him to dance without knowing him for what he was, and had said nothing. She did not weep. She had trained herself long since not to weep where it showed, and there was no one there to see it in any case, which she supposed distantly was its own kind of answer to how she had lived. She only sat very still in the last of the gold light, and waited for morning and for whatever it was going to bring. He came the next evening, on foot, without a servant, in the same plain greatcoat he had worn the night of the sleet storm, and stood at the foot of the cooper's stair, with his hat in his hands, like a man come to confess to a magistrate, rather than a woman he had once married in a country church for love. She did not ask him in at once. She stood in the doorway with the last of the daylight behind her, and looked at him a long moment. The broken nose, the grey eyes gone paler still with whatever this last day had cost him, and said only, "You had better come up." He came up. Rose was asleep in the inner room. The outer room held 1 table, 2 chairs, a low fire, and 6 years of silence that filled every corner it could reach. Say it, Iris said. Whatever it is you have come to say. Say it plain, or do not say it at all. He set his hat down. He did not sit, though she gestured at the second chair. He stood, the way a man stands to receive a sentence rather than to deliver one. My name is Gideon Ash, he said. It was Gideon Ash when you married me, and it is Gideon Ash now, though the world has added a title to it I did not ask for, and have never wanted the way other men want such things. I was not lost at sea. I was taken prisoner in the 2nd year of the war, held where no letter of mine could reach further than a locked room, and by the time I had bought or begged my way free of it, 4 years had passed, and I came home to find myself already buried, already mourned, and you already gone from the house with no word left as to where. Your aunt told me you were dead, Iris said. She told me the marriage was never legal, that the register had been lost in a fire, that I had best take what small charity the family offered and go, before I disgraced a name I had no true claim to. There was no fire, Gideon said. There was a page torn from a register and burned in a grate in this house, by her own hand, and I have the word of the clergyman who performed the ceremony, alive still, in a parish 2 counties distant, that he kept his own copy of the entry all these years, against exactly such a day as this. Iris said nothing. Her hands, on the table, were very still. I found you again 11 days after I set foot back in England, he said. I did not come to you at once. I told myself I needed to be certain, to gather proof, to see the register copy safely into my own hands before I disturbed a life I had already ruined once by dying in every record but the truth. That is the reason I gave myself, and it was not a lie, but it was not the whole of it either. What was the whole of it? He was quiet a long moment. The fire popped once, and settled. I wanted to see who you were, he said, when you did not know a duke was watching. 6 years in that house taught me exactly what people become, in front of a title. I have watched grown men weep with gratitude over favours they'd have refused to grant a beggar. I have watched women who would not give a crust to a starving child fall over themselves to praise my grief, because grief in a duke is fashionable. I did not know any longer what was true and what was performance, and I did not trust myself to know it, not after everything that had been taken from me by people who smiled while they did it. So you watched me, Iris said, not knowing who was watching. That was the test. It was not meant as a test of you, he said. I had no doubt of you. I had loved you before I had a title to hide behind, and I loved the woman I saw give her own cloak to a stranger's son in a storm, not knowing anyone of consequence would ever hear of it. That was never in question. His voice roughened. It was myself I did not trust. I did not know if I could still be simply a man, to anyone, ever again. I needed to know that I could stand in a room and be spoken to plainly, be corrected, be told my aunt's cruelty by its right name, by someone who had no notion what standing to gain by flattering me instead. You gave me that 12 times over, and never once knew you were giving me anything at all. And Rose, Iris said, very low. You let her ask a stranger to dance, your own daughter. You let her stand there not knowing. I did not plan that, he said, and for the first time his voice broke properly, the plain, unpractised break of a man who has forgotten how his own grief sounds aloud. I have never in my life been so unmade as I was, kneeling in that ballroom, by a child who did not know me, offering me the one kindness in that whole gathering that cost her something and asked nothing back. I did not plan it. I have thought of nothing else since. You should have told me, Iris said. That night, the very next morning, not left me to hear it from Mrs. Pruitt, 3 days after your aunt turned me from the house like a servant caught stealing. I know it, he said. I have no defence for the delay except that I am a coward in exactly one particular, and it is this one. I did not know how to give you back 6 years and ask you, in the same breath, to forgive me the keeping of them. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The fire settled again. Somewhere in the inner room Rose turned over in her sleep and murmured something neither of them could make out. I am not asking you to forgive it tonight, he said at last. I am not asking you for anything tonight. I came to tell you the truth, all of it plainly, because you have never once had it plain from me or from this family, and you were owed it before anything else was owed you. Whatever you choose to do with it is yours to choose. I will not press you for an answer. I would rather have your no, freely given, than your yes, because you felt a duke had asked, and a poor woman does not refuse a duke. I did not marry a duke, Iris said. No, he said. You married a young fool with a broken nose who had no notion then what his family was capable of. I am asking you now, not to take back the wife of that fool, but to consider, freely, in your own time, whether you might have any use at all for the man he became. She did not answer that. She sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at him a long while, and he let her look, and did not fill the silence with anything more, and at last he took up his hat and made to go. I will not come again, he said, unless you send for me. You have my word on that, whatever else you think my word is worth now. Wait, she said. He waited. Rose does not know, she said, any of it, that her father is alive, that he is a duke, that the man she asked to dance with was either. No, he said. She does not. Then when you do tell her, Iris said, and I think you must, and soon you will tell her plainly, not as a grand surprise to be enjoyed, as a truth she is owed, the way I was owed mine tonight. You have my word, he said again, and this time it did not sound like an apology. It sounded like a vow freshly made. He left her the small ring of keys misses. Pruitt had given him to leave, in case Iris wished to come and go from the court without waiting to be admitted, and did not ask her to use them, and walked back down the hill in the dark without once looking back, though it cost him more than the 6 years in that locked room had cost him, not to. She did not send for him the next day, nor the day after. She sat with the truth the way she had once sat up with a fevered child, watching it, waiting to see which way it would break. She thought of the register page, kept safe 2 counties distant by a clergyman, with no reason to lie. She thought of Lady Editha's mouth making its small, precise line, and understood, now, exactly what that mouth had cost her. 6 years running. On the 3rd day she walked to Harrow Court herself, in her own boots, with Rose's hand in hers, and asked Mrs. Pruitt, plainly, to take her to him. She found him in the same cold study, where he had begun and burned a dozen letters, and he rose the moment she came in, and did not come toward her, only stood, and waited, the way she had asked him to wait. I have thought about what you said, she told him, about my choice being mine freely, and not owed to a title. And? I did not fall in love with a duke, she said. I fell in love with a young man who once walked me home from church in the rain rather than let his family's carriage be seen waiting for a governess's daughter, and who wrote me letters plain enough that I never once doubted a word of them. She drew a breath. I find, to my own surprise, that I still know that man when I see him, title or none. I would like to try knowing him again. slowly, plainly, with nothing left unsaid between us, ever, from this day. That, he said, is the only condition I would have asked of myself, if I had thought to ask it. There is another, she said. You will never again decide, on my behalf, what I am owed to know. Not for my protection, not for any reason at all. Agreed, he said. Wholly, then yes, she said. It was the only word she needed, and she gave it plainly, the way she gave everything. He crossed the room to her then, slow, as though he did not entirely trust the ground to hold, and took her hand, and drew the worn glove from it finger by finger, slow, deliberate, until her bare hand lay in his, red still at the knuckle, steady now, not shaking at all. He did not kiss her mouth. He bent his head and kissed the back of her hand instead, once, gently, the way a man seals a vow, rather than begins one, and she let him, and did not look away. Rose, watching from the doorway where she had not quite been told to wait, tugged Mrs. Pruitt's sleeve. "Is he going to tell me now," she asked, "why he looked at me the way he did, that night at the dance?" "I expect he is, child," Mrs. Pruitt said, and had to press her apron to her eyes a moment before she trusted her voice to go on. "I expect he has been waiting his whole life to." He told her that same evening, kneeling again as he had knelt in the ballroom, so that his eyes were level with hers, and he told it plain, exactly as Iris had asked. That he was her father, that he had been thought dead, and was not, that he had watched her ask a lonely man to dance, not knowing that man had thought of nothing else, in all his grief, but a daughter he had never once been permitted to hold. Rose considered this, as she considered most things, with great gravity. "So when I danced with you," she said, "I was dancing with my own father, and I did not know it." "You were. That is the best thing that has ever happened to me," she decided, "and I did not even know it was happening, which I think makes it better, not worse." And then, because she was 6, and the wonder of the day had already begun to give way to practical concerns, "Will you dance with me again? Properly this time? I should like to learn the steps if you will teach me." "I will teach you every one," he said, and found, to his own quiet astonishment, that his voice held steady the whole way through the promise. The register page arrived from the distant parish within the fortnight, plain ink on plain paper, the names of Gideon Ash and Iris Hale, set down years before in a country hand, and no court in the land could unmake what it proved. Lady Editha Voss did not wait to be told to leave Harrow Court. She left within the week, for a house in Bath her nephew settled on her out of what he called, plainly, obligation rather than affection, and she was not spoken of again at the court above once a year, at Christmas, when her name came up only to be set gently aside. Lady Constance Pride married elsewhere, within the season, and no one at Harrow Court thought the worse of her for it, since she had done, in the end, no more than she had been asked to do, and had done it, at least, without cruelty. The wedding, when it came, a proper one this time, blessed before the same distant clergyman who had kept the truth safe 6 years in a locked drawer, was small and quiet, and over almost before the county had finished hearing of it, which was exactly how Iris had asked it to be, and exactly how Gideon, who had learned by then to give her whatever she plainly asked for, arranged it. Tom, the boy from the ditch, grew tall in the kitchen garden at Harrow Court, and was apprenticed at 12 to the head gardener, and never once learned that the physician who had saved his fever, and the coat on his back every winter after, had first been set in motion by a woman who never told him her part in it, because she had never done it to be thanked. A year later, almost to the week, snow fell soft and early over Harrow Court, and in the small parlour where the family fire was kept, rather than the great hall where guests were entertained, Gideon Ashy sat with his bare hand laced through his wife's, her glove long since given up for good, the way it is given up between people who no longer need armour against each other. Rose, 7 now, and no less quick, no less certain of her own opinions, stood before them both with her hands on her hips. "You promised to teach me every step," she reminded her father. "I did," he said, and rose, and bowed to her with all the ceremony he would have given a duchess, and led his daughter in a slow turn before the fire, while her mother watched from the low chair, with her bare hand still warm from his, and did not look away, and did not need to hide that she was glad. Outside the frost lay thick on the road below the house, the same road where a woman with no cloak and no boots had once carried a stranger's son through a storm, believing herself entirely unwatched, and asking nothing at all in return. The bridge over the near stream, mended that autumn at the new Duke's quiet order, held steady under the weight of the snow, the way it would go on holding, winter after winter. Long after the story of why it had needed mending was forgotten by everyone but the 2 people who remembered it best. A person is only ever truly known by what they do when they believe no one is watching, and it is a rare and quiet grace when someone is watching after all, and loves them all the better for it.